Hello and welcome to Planet Poetry. I'm Robin Houghton.
And I'm Peter Kenny. This week we talk about collaboration and meet Hilaire and Joolz Sparks, who talk with Robin at the same time about their collection London Undercurrents. Now that's collaboration.
And Peter delves into the august magazine that is a PN review, and we try not to get an inferiority complex.
It's hard though.
It's hard, yeah. And I go back to one of my favourite poems of all time by Ian Duig.
Looking forward to that. So shall we hear what Joolz and Hilaire said to Robin?
Hilaire was highly commended in the 2019 Live Canon International Poetry Prize. Her short story, The Red Suitcase, was published by Nightjar Press in 2020 and is included in the Best British Short Stories 2021 from Salt Publishing. Her collaboration with the artist Stephen Graham, Indoors Looking Out, from Lowercase Press 2020, features haiku and tanka written in response to lockdown. Joolz Sparks is a North London-based writer. Her poetry appears in magazines including Magma, Shooterlit Mag, and Ink, Sweat and Tears. She was poet in residence at Leicester Square Tube Station and has been shortlisted for the Bridport Poetry Prize. She is a member of the collective Malika's Poetry Kitchen and has work in its recent anthology Too Loud, Too Young, Too Different. Joolz and Hilaire are the co-authors of London Undercurrents, published by Holland Park Press in 2019, which uncovers London's unsung heroines north and south of the river. So a big Planet Poetry welcome to Hilaire and Joolz. Hi to you both.
Hello.
Hello, Robin.
Before we start talking about your brilliant book, London Undercurrents, I'm going to invite one of you to read a poem just to give us a flavour. And I think, Joolz, you're going to read something, aren't you, to get us going?
Yes, I'm going to read from the point of view of a 13-year-old girl back in 1893, somewhere in a secret location in Islington. A 13-year-old girl's to-do list. Secret location, Islington, 1893. 1. Lock the front door. Put the crow on lookout at street end, case the police come a-knocking with sledgehammers. 2. Uncle melts spoons. 3. Bill greases the real coins with tallow, so collars won't stick and halves harden around them, be put together easy. 4. Ma is on the cyanide dip, smiling at electroplate magic as it turns blue metal to silver. 5. Pa dries the mould, watching for hints that the metal might fly. 6. Tom nips the gap with scissors as a new shilling emerges, passes it on to me. 7. We'll hum and laugh as Tom goes too quick or leaves me twiddling as a tease. 8. It's my turn to knurl the grooved edges made ill-shaped by plaster of Paris until a fingernail won't snag. 9. Pass to Aunt Sal at her slumming post. She'll dirty up the shine with lampblack and oil. 10. Make sure each fake looks like it's been handled by many an eager finger and come to us for cleaning, not making. 11. Meld on and on. A merry-go-round of coin pieces, so clever in our fakery we itch to pocket one or two. 12. Tonight's lot is already sold and wanted. 13. Ma says we can't be precious about our art.
Thanks, Joolz. I think that gives us a taste straight away of this book where your poems, both of your poems, go into the lives of these women from the past. There's some wonderful words in here. Clearly, nips the gat, knurling the grooved edges, etc. And I know there's a couple of notes at the end. So you might want to just say what those words mean. And I'm interested in how you came across them as well, the sort of colloquial and technical.
Yes. Well, GAT it's a telltale neck of the channel. So when the fakers were putting the coin together, the metal was poured through this, and so it'd leave like a little bit off that had to be snipped. Knurl is the pattern on the sides of a coin, and I think that term is still used today.
Is it?
The knurl of a 5p piece or whatever. And slumming is smearing bright metal with lampblack and oil so that it looks old instead of new. And I think I found these terms from Henry Mayhew had written a book about London. One of the editions was London's Underworld.
Right. So
there's a piece there about fakers. And then I also did some research, just searching online about coin faking and how far back it had gone. Because I think when I started writing this, there might have been some dodgy pound coins in circulation. And
yes.
I thought, when I see Hilaire next, maybe I should have written or have got some information about, this is when we were writing the book together, maybe I should get some information about faking. And I discovered that back in the 1800s that young girls as young as like 13 did fake coins as part of like a family gathering. So it was a family
business, really.
Business, it was. And they all worked together, which I thought was actually quite lovely to be working with your family.
Yeah, and I love this idea of, we're used to the sort of Dickensian view of children being exploited, but here we've got actually poor families as entrepreneurs, looking for ways up, and that's and I know that kind of theme comes back. Hilaire, tell us a bit about how you and Joolz actually got together to work on this collection.
So we'd met at a workshop back in 2012 or something, I think, about reading your poetry out loud. Mm-hmm. So that's where we met. And then we just started going to poetry gigs together, egging each other on to read at open mics, and then started, I think Joolz suggested like maybe getting together and doing some writing. And so we started meeting up maybe once a month, some British Library and places like that, and just giving each other a prompt and individually writing, and at that point not sharing anything at all with each other. And then probably after about a year of doing that, we started talking about actually doing a project together, writing a project together. And so we had quite long discussions about what we were both interested in, what kind of form it might take, and kind of gradually, actually, I think fairly quickly then came up with, like what we're both passionate about. London, we both moved to London, me from the other side of the world.
I did detect a London accent there somehow.
Yeah. And also both very proud to call ourselves feminists. So kind of that's where we really started to kind of get the core idea of the collection.
At what point did you get stuck into research and think, actually, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna go out and find these stories? And what were the things that influenced you? Was it stories from newspaper cuttings, individuals, or places? Where you found about an old factory, you want to find out who worked there. What kind of threads ran through your research?
So, sorry, Joolz, do you want to go?
I was just going to say that Hilaire started the very first poem that she bought and shared with me, and that was about lavender, wasn't it?
Yes.
If I remember rightly. And it was absolutely beautiful. It was about picking lavender in the fields in Battersea when it was back in the day when it was all fields and growing land. I think you'd found that through your own research, hadn't you, Hilaire? Or had you found that through a street name?
I think at that point I was already getting interested so I've lived in Battersea for a long time, but it was probably around the time we met that things suddenly started to change because of the redevelopment of the power station. And that sort of got me much more interested in my local area and the history and heritage of the area. And then, but I actually think it was in maybe one of our discussions about what kind of things we might write about. And I mentioned to Joolz about the fact that, because there's a street in Battersea called Lavender Hill, and it's because they used to grow lavender there. And I think Joolz said, well, I wonder who picked the lavender. And that was kind of the spark that got me set on writing that first poem. In terms of what we researched, I think it was a mix of things that came out of our discussion, like we talked about, what was it like for women travelling in London? How far could they travel? And, how would they travel? And so, some was out of discussion, some was like buildings or street names in our local areas. And then I guess sometimes the thing with the research, which I love, is you start looking for something, you're researching something, and then you start going down some other track.
Yeah.
You come across something interesting.
Yeah, yeah. There's a poem called Clippy Top Deck that I really enjoyed. And it's this narrative of how young women in the First World War were famously drafted in to do men's jobs, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so presumably this appealed to you. And tell us a bit about the poem, and do please read it for us.
Okay. Shall I read the poem first and then talk about it? Yeah.
Great.
Clippy, Top Deck, Route 19, 1917. I swear to God, when all this ends, you won't see me back in service. I'm done with hours on my knees, scrubbing someone else's floors, mumbling, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, to Madam Ballum. I won't be cooped below stairs when I've had the run of London. Never used to hardly cross the river. Now it's 10 times a day, all weathers, and I'm singing out the stops. Clapham Junction, Battersea Bridge, Beaufort Street. A plash of rain don't bother me, reminds me I'm alive, and every swing of Route 19 is patterned in my brain. Give me a starless night or choking fog, and I'll still not miss a stop between Piccadilly and Finsbury Park, nor southbound far as Tooting Bec. Punching tickets top deck, sleet stinging my cheeks, still beats mangling Milady's sheets and towels. But if she begged on bended knee for my return? No. Whatever peace brings, from here on in, I'm polishing nothing but my own boots. Step up now, hold tight, ding ding, ding ding.
That's a great finish. I'm polishing nothing but my own boots. I love this voice. The whole book is women's voices. I like the way that you've both put yourself in their shoes. And sometimes it's not actually the women themselves. It's people who interact with them. There are servants speaking or shop assistants, and sometimes it's through their eyes. But I love this kind of defiant women. It's interesting because one of my thoughts was, well, why is this book of poetry? It's almost like it could be a prose collection of short stories, or it could be something factual. But, when you get to things like sleet stinging my cheeks still beats mangling Milady's sheets and towels, you sort of think, yeah, this is the stuff, isn't it? Did at any time you think that this would be a collection of prose poems, or were you attracted to the idea of being able to express things differently in poetry? It's a bit of a general question, but just interested really on your thoughts on that.
I think we always wanted to write a poetry collection together. It was always came from a poems first background. Mm-hmm. And then as we researched and wrote in different forms, we realised it gave us freedom really to create these different voices for all the different women through different centuries and their different circumstances, and to bring life to them, but also left room for the poet as well to weave themselves within that poem. So there is like a duality there. There's the woman from the past, her words and her soul and her attitude and her opinions. There's the form and the musicality of the language that poetry allows you to use and engage with. Brevity, you're in and you're out quickly as well. And that's because neither of us writes really, really, really long poems. So you get in and out. And which then enables you to leave wanting more and to see the breadth of women's voices as well, because you're on to the next one and the next one is very different. And enabled us as poets to have some sort of a comment or a ghost of the poet within each poem as well.
Oh, I like that idea, the ghost, and that you're kind of almost reliving it, or there's always, you say, that interplay with, in fact, some of the poems are not set that far in the past, are they? There's one that spoke to me called Permitted to Play. This is the story of women footballers. Joolz, this is your poem. Perhaps you'd like to read it for us, please.
So this is permitted to play, Arsenal Football Stadium, home end, 1991. Dad, when I grow up, I will be First Division, midfield, score the winning goal. On this turf, Arsenal Stadium, Gillespie Road. Teacher says I'm better than the boys. Dad, I can beat them on this pitch, with you and Mum eating hot dogs in the red seats, waving scarves. On telly, they only show the men's. Dad, when can I play for Arsenal? When? And this poem is written in 4-4-2 formation.
Excellent, yeah. There's just sort of quirky things that really kind of add to the richness of this, yes.
When I moved to the area, I had no idea that the women's team weren't allowed to play, or that they could only play on occasion in the stadium. And I'm not really into football at all, and I sort of almost said to myself, I'm never going to write a poem about football. But then as I was researching for our book, I thought, no, I have to write this poem. I have to write something about women and football. And it's only relatively recently that it's got on TV and it's getting publicity and it's being taken seriously. Mm. So there's much, much work yet to be done.
Well, I'm sort of proud to say I had a little teeny role in the promotion of women's sport, because in the early 1990s I was a women's sports promotion manager for Nike in the UK. And I remember this period because I did a lot of research into women's sports. Obviously, the idea was, what other sports should Nike be making shoes for women, not just aerobics. And at that time, girls were starting to play football, but it was still very much a minority thing for girls. It didn't get taught in schools at that point, in 1991, really. It was unusual. And the big issue was women's football not being on TV. Mm. So when that started to take off a bit later, I think things really changed. But you say it's a long way still to go. Mm. But actually, a few years after your poem, 1995, there was a big TV ad that Nike did called "If You Let Me Play." And it featured lots of very young girls in a playground, and they were reciting all the statistics about why girls should get into sport, how it's good for their health, and which was people really liked at the time. So yeah, it's a commercial company, obviously. But when I saw this title of this poem, when I saw the story, it made me think of those heady days. Yeah. But now we see women's football on TV a lot, don't we?
Yeah. It's great. It's great. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a really brilliant project you worked on there. So it gave me chills just thinking about that, thinking about how the power of it.
You tackle some big topics. There's this poem, which is one of yours, Hilaire, called Neighbours. And it says so many things, I think, about not only how women this is sort of the 1930s, I suppose, and actually, and later than that, had to manage their own birth control. Mm-hmm. And this kind of not really talking directly about something, and women had their own way of somehow knowing what was being said without saying it. So something very poignant about this. I wonder if you could read us that poem, please.
Yes, yeah. Neighbours, Stewart's Lane, 1930s. Beecham's pills should do the trick, I tell her. Take him when he's down the pub and the kids are tucked up. She pulls the door to, cradling her cup of sugar. Take him with a mug of hot gin. That'll ease your worries. They're behind on the rent, like most of our street. Her third nipper not long weaned, and herself peaky as a skinned rabbit. Just pray it don't start on the tram into work. It comes on heavy. Been through it myself 3 times. Each one worse than the last. Thanks, June, she whispers. Lets herself out, clutching the cup. Next time she knocks, I get my sugar back. We have a right old moan about our husbands. I don't ask. She doesn't say.
What took you to that particular theme?
So one of the books that I was using for research, which my local heritage service put me onto, was called For Love and Shillings, which was based on oral history interviews with women in the 80s, I think, about their experiences, their working lives, and taking work as including, like housework and, bringing up the family and so on. And there was a mention in there of saying that Battersea was at the forefront of like providing community fertility control measures and so on in the 30s or 40s. And I tried to find, I couldn't really find anything at all about that. But I did also in that book, there's some quite almost harrowing stories about women being, well, a woman saying that like it was like she was pregnant all the time and it was no life, which is just so really quite terrible. But also there was another book that I read about midwives, but it also had a lot of, again, interviews, oral history interviews with women recording how they control their fertility. And for a lot of working class women, the main method of birth control was abortion, not in any kind of clean, medically done way, but, self-administered and relying on advice or from their friends and neighbours. So it felt like something important to write about, that this was the reality for most women until, well, certainly the NHS. And then even then, until the 70s, really birth control was only primarily prescribed on the NHS to married women.
Yeah.
Or if it was thought that they just had a baby and it would be dangerous for them to get pregnant again quickly. So, and, I was thinking about Nell Dunn's Up the Junction, which was early 60s, and there's quite a harrowing. And again, that is based on Nell Dunn's experiences, what she witnessed when she was living in Battersea. So,
and that was very controversial at the time, wasn't it? There was so much in London Undercurrents that I really enjoyed. I think it's a fabulous book. And I was particularly interested, partly because I'm a Londoner. But I'm sure you're both working on other projects now, and it would be nice to know. Joolz, what have you been up to? Anything you want to share?
Well, I've got a poem at the moment in an anthology because I'm part of Malika's Poetry Kitchen collective as well. Yes. So we've got, I think it's our 20th anniversary. So we've got an anthology out, edited by Maisie Lawrence and Rishi Dastardar, Too Young, Too Loud, Too Different. So I've got a poem in that. My solo work as well, I've got 2 pamphlet-sized collections that I'm trying to get published, get homes for them. They've both been long-listed, so almost, but then not quite published.
Well, long-listing, I mean, someone's going to take it definitely.
I hope so.
You're sort of, you're close to it, probably. Do you want to read us anything? A recent poem?
Oh, yes. Can I read the poem from Too Young, Too Loud, Too Different?
Please do.
It's about a woman, really. And when I wrote it, it's a good few years ago, so it was before all the lockdown and our current situation. And it almost seems like a bit of social history now, but it's also, I think, at the moment we are dangerously close to women being going backwards in some cases as well, in that it's quite frightening to go out late at night, and by late at night I mean 9 o'clock in the evening, which is not late at all, and so it feels quite poignant to read it now, and celebratory still, and I hope these days come again. So this is 5 days and counting. The come hither puff of smoke from cute, cordoned-off Friday night pub outsiders, and that old familiar line of crawlers stumbling into view, sends her lurching from new boy to taxi bundle parties. Budge up, doll, room for plenty more. A 2-day bender of build-up and paper-licked promises. So-and-so's got a mate down the road, he'll fix you up. Through gums tasting of blood rush powder, loving that trauma bond on Sunday with the sequin survivors of Saturday. Troubadours searching for 24-hour off-licence. Take your top off, pass one round, in back alleys and on strange mattresses. Dancing to the release of hand jobs, mouths. Then after, she's a stranger. Spilling out onto morning pavement, sad and spent a fortune. Feeling that inevitable come down, deafened by dawn chorus, her own "Why again?" guilt trip song, dispersing into juice-cleansed morning, violent gym routine, hiding in plain sight behind Office and Open Plan Monday.
Huh. Thank you for that. I was going to say I can sympathise a little bit with that sort of thing going on in the past. Not sure I had quite a wild bender as that, but certainly that business of going to the office on a Monday.
I do have to say that's poetic license. It's not my story, or is it?
Yeah, I think she does protest too much. I think, but like you say, celebratory as well. Yes.
Women should be able to behave however they want, really, shouldn't they? And
indeed. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and it's nice. It is nice to see the youngsters out still enjoying themselves.
Yes, absolutely. I was in a pub last night in London, and it was loud, it was buzzy. I just thought, you get a certain energy from that, and it's really nice to see. Hilaire, how about you? What's been happening?
In Putney Library, I've got a display of some of my books and pamphlets and associated writing stuff at the moment.
Fantastic.
So that was a really, really quite a cool thing to do, be invited to do. Yeah. And I'm doing a reading there on the 3rd of February. The other thing that's going to keep me really busy over the next few months is I'm actually a judge for the Manchester Fiction Prize, which is quite a big competition. So I'm going to be reading hundreds of short stories, I think, over the next few months. So that's because I write prose. Well, I think you do as well, Joolz, don't we? So we write prose as well. So that's I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be. I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot from it as well.
That sounds great.
Did you want to read one of your poems, Hilaire?
Yes, Hilaire, we haven't heard your poem yet.
Yeah, so this is quite a contrast to Joolz's. It's probably quite a nice contrast to our current weather as well. Summer holes. January was paddle boats, mint choc chip in a stale cone, sunburn dressed in cold black tea, French cricket on the beach, and the mad zigzag dash provoked by March flies. January was salt and sand and high hot winds delivering a peppery frisson of bushfire smoke. January was back to school sales in town. January was endless like boredom. One long Sunday evening of low-level dread.
Wow. January, so... Oh, God, I wasn't attending properly, was I?
January in Australia.
January, it's my childhood. So this is, I mean...
Hang on, ice cream cones. Of course, January, okay. Bonkers. Oh, that was lovely. a bit of sunny Australian January, that's what we need.
Yes, yeah.
Well, Joolz and Hilaire, it's been fantastic having you on here, and I've really enjoyed hearing about London Undercurrents. And, collaborating is a fantastic thing, isn't it? It's more than 1 + 1 = 5 or whatever. And the research that's gone into it, and some beautiful, beautiful poems. So congratulations on that. And also good to hear that you're both on new projects, and we'll hear much more from you in the future, no doubt. So I just want to say a huge thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you for having us.
It's been really lovely. And yes, I'd say to anyone out there, grab somebody and collaborate with them, because it's a really wonderful experience and you have no idea where it's going to lead you to. And we need more of it, more collaboration.
Oh, that sounds fantastic advice. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin.
So I really enjoyed that conversation with Joolz and Hilaire that you had, another three-hander, and that worked really well. I love what Joolz was saying about collaboration at the end, because I sort of look back at my own, projects over the years, and all the things that have come to any kind of real fruition have all been through collaborating with other people.
It's interesting.
It's quite weird, isn't it? Because poetry is quite, I read it described somewhere as the private art, that you do quietly in your study and things. That sense of perhaps poets aren't as natural collaborators as other artists, but there's so much good comes out of collaboration. You and I have banded together on occasions, haven't we, including this podcast?
Yeah, indeed. Also, I can think of a few poets already who seem to really kind of revel and, like you, kind of be stimulated by the idea of a collaboration.
Yeah. I did launch this book about 10 years ago with my friend Richard Fleming in Guernsey, which was supported by the Guernsey Arts Commission. And we sort of basically wrote two halves of a book together. And my experience of growing up on Guernsey and then leaving it, and his experience of growing up in... He grew up in Northern Ireland and left the Troubles and came to Guernsey and found it, this marvellous haven. And our two sort of stories fitted together quite nicely in a way. But, neither of us would have been able to get the book together or talk to the Guernsey Arts Commission properly without us being a double act, And I think the power of two, you were saying it's like equals 5 or more, doesn't it?
Yes, and that's an interesting point about, getting funding. Being a serial failure of applying for grants from the Arts Council, I do look at the people who have been given money in the periods that I've applied for. And it does strike me that if you have a collaborative project, it's looked upon more favourably than just, I'd like the money to get my first collection together. Not that people don't get money for that, but if you can demonstrate that you're working with someone else and the two of you are making it happen, that seems to go down well.
Yeah. I mean, you and I working on this podcast, being in a double act actually helps, doesn't it? That you've got somebody else to kind of do stuff that you're not so good at or help you through the difficult stuff, that...
Oh, yeah, totally. Totally.
You reach places you may not have attained.
All those things.
Anyway, back to Hilaire and Joolz, maybe. What a way of presenting the secret history of women in London over the years, all the social changes. You were talking about Clippy Top Deck as one of your favourites, and I just really like that, how that poem encapsulates that whole social change of women, moving into different kinds of work because of the war and the changes in society and expectations and everything that span out of that. But it was just so effortless, and the fact that it just came from one person's perspective, just made it entirely relatable. If you were reading a kind of book of history about it, it just wouldn't be so alive, would it?
That's right. And the question I asked about, how come this turned into a book of poetry rather than prose, or actually it never turned into it was always going to be poetry, as I explained. But you're right, because in fact I could see how these little vignettes, sometimes so much was packed into a very short piece. And that is poetry, of course, isn't it? So in a way it was perfect.
Yeah.
For expressing these, as you say, these huge changes that have gone on over the years and the effects of them on women.
But something like that poem Neighbours, about women, having compelled to manage their own birth control through, it's just such a ghastly business. And you think there's places all over the world where birth control isn't allowed or isn't condoned or... Yeah. Well, this is in our history. This is certainly an alive thing all over the planet.
Yeah, totally.
And actually, putting something like women's football in the context of those other things, maybe suddenly think about women football as completely differently as actual... I mean, I haven't, to be honest, thought about women's football very much, but but
there you go.
But actually, it's part of the same story, isn't it? Of the gradual emancipation of women that's still got a long way to go. And your own part in it, that was a revelation to me, Robin.
I'm probably picking that up more than it needs to be, but it felt like it at the time. Yeah. And that little advert, you can still see it on YouTube. I went and watched it to remind myself, and I still feel proud of that. I didn't make the advert, but I still feel proud to have been through that, for sure.
What other subjects were covered?
Well, all kinds of individual stories. There's one about women working in the White Leadworks factory in Islington, talking about seeing the doctor regularly.
Yeah.
They're told to take a bath once a week and things like that. And all the time there's signs of their gums going blue and they're constantly headachy.
Oh, God, yeah. Lead poisoning.
It's sort of a bit grim. But again, it's in the voice of this girl who's, pleased to be in a job and kind of doing it. But it's not all sort of grim stories. There are some fabulous celebrations. There's one called Hollywood Comes to Holloway, the Gaumont 1949. So it's a sort of joyous story of this girl going to see a film and dreaming of being American and being part of this world. And then there's another lovely one about, at 65, Miss Lancaster is still at the wheel. So there's this lovely story of this woman who's still driving, and she became a taxi driver during the war and carries on enjoying her freedom. A bit like the Clippy story, I suppose, but of driving. So, and then there's a Battersea Women's Pub outing later on, which actually relates a bit to Joolz's poem, that women on a night out. So it's a celebration as well as a kind of testament to what these women endured. It also celebrates the joy in their lives, I think.
Even though it was a story of the challenges women have faced in London historically, I never felt kind of hectored or, lectured at, because the women were telling their own stories, and it was just for us to think, oh God, yeah. It's good. I really like the idea of a collection about something rather than 40 random musings about things. It's very much kind of in vogue now, isn't it, that there's that sense that this relentlessly has to be about the same subject, but this sounds very varied and colourful, and is a story that hasn't been told. I think they've done really well with it. Incidentally, I also read Hilaire's story, The Red Suitcase, from Nightjar Press recently.
Did you?
Yeah, very creepy and atmospheric about a woman staying in a guest house.
Sounds like it's right up your strata then, something a bit creepy and a bit macabre, maybe.
I encountered it in my forays into dark fiction, and she's got a nicely unsettling way about her, which is a positive thing in dark fiction, of course.
I gather you've been looking at some poetry magazines. You feel the need to emote about, for want of a better word.
Yeah. I've been subscribing to Rialto for quite a while, and PN Review, I used to subscribe to that literally decades ago, and I've begun reading it again now. And what a read it is. It's kind of, it comes out bi-monthly, doesn't it? But you feel like you need 2 months to read through it. Obviously, it's mainly about poetry, but there's just so much other stuff there, like it's positioning poetry in this big field of literature. It's not poetry on its own. So, like the book reviews, for example, the editorial, which took me about 5 reads through to understand, is actually quite pithy and has a distinct point, even though it's kind of doesn't yield its meaning very, very easily. He starts off talking about John Donne, in the autumnal, and saying, "I hate extremes, yet I had rather stay with tombs than cradles to wear out a day." And the piece seems to be addressing writers who've got no knowledge of the canon. And he's calling back to John Donne's tombs, writers who may even strive to invalidate them on the grounds of contemporary issues strictly irrelevant to their existence. So he's talking about what he's seeing as a generation of writers that are kind of ignoring the past. And there's a kind of, he talks about Bouvard et Pécuchet, which is a book by Flaubert, which I haven't read. I had to look it up. He uses it in a kind of rather long and roundabout way to illustrate the fact there's various styles of literature. And I think what he's doing is accusing people of not really kind of being grounded in lots and lots of reading. And he says, and this is a kind of example of the slightly convoluted way he's talking about it, this is not the case with the poetry of some of our voluble necropolis of verse contemporaries who nourish their art on an imagined future rich in relevance and leave the realised past well buried. They don't leave it behind. They have never gone that way. So, and I think he's accusing people of just kind of certain modern poets who are knee-deep in sort of contemporary issues of just kind of hoo-haing previous traditions.
I think that's interesting. I'm also a subscriber, a fairly recent subscriber to PN Review, and I do enjoy it, but I think you're absolutely right. It's a big read, and I don't read everything in it, big confession.
Yeah.
It has quite a lot of these, I suppose you'd call them lyric essays.
Yeah.
It seems to be a form they're quite keen on. I like the reviews, and and I like the poetry, although I find it quite directive. And interesting that you picked up on that editorial in the most recent issue. It is quite kind of telling you what is fine in the poetry world, and one does read it, and you can easily get an inferiority complex reading the magazine, I think. And in fact, your reading of the editorial, my first thought was, oh my goodness, I've got some poems out to the PN review. Why did I even bother? Because he's probably commenting on all the trash that he gets sent, or what he feels is all completely substandard. And out it comes in an editorial. But anyway, it's not all about me. I have to keep telling myself that.
The sort of bits I quite liked, in the news and notes section, I enjoyed a bit from Sue Andy talking about her relationship with Jean Binter Breeze and being punched by her at one point and stuff. That there was something unsentimental about it,
Yeah, the section at the beginning, news and notes, you're right. And there's a lovely thing about Pablo Neruda. To mark the 50th anniversary of his being awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, there's going to be a box 5-volume set of his poetry, 3,692 pages.
Not exactly a bedtime read, really. But
I nearly spat out my tea at that. It's just like, how many years does it take to write that many poems? So
God. That thing about the Varney Capildeo essays that are in here, they slightly madden me. I think she's a fine poet and she is an excellent writer, caveat, caveat, caveat. But it's just like, bloody hell, it's kind of annoying as well, because it's such poetic prose that it forgets to do basic things that prose does. For example, at the end, she's got this piece about not listening quietly. And then towards the end, she says, in the relative local ease of summer 2021, walking through a port, I heard drumming and shouting from a junction. I looked for the drummers, imagining a festival. There was a group of men beating their chests, beating their own chests ritually. They produced the rhythmic sound of great drums. No women accompanied them in any way. Instead of a festival of dancing, instead of channeling gods, shouting rather than singing, big men stood in a cluster. A smaller man quietly leafleted for some cause. I was tempted to talk to the leafleter, if only to add mixed voices in conversational exchange to the fringe of the rousing, obliterating soundscape. I did not stop. And it's just like, actually, as a reader, you want to know where, I was walking through a port. Okay, where? What were these people doing? Just ground it somehow,
Well, I think you're taking it a bit too literally there, Pete. if you put your poetry head on, it's a bit mysterious, I admit.
It's very mysterious, at least, but I don't know. I just feel a bit sort of shortchanged by that.
But as for the poems, what I do like is that I'm always reading work by names by people I've not come across before, and often, I'm really interested and impressed by what I find there.
Yes.
What is slightly frustrating is that not everybody is mentioned in the biogs at the back. It says some contributors, so not everybody's mentioned there. And so many times I've wanted to look someone up, and they're not at the back.
I don't feel shortchanged by my subscription to PNR at all. And I kind of enjoy being slightly irritated by the writing,
But maybe being challenged is part of the game. If you think of being irritated as being challenged, maybe.
Yeah.
For all my niggles about it, I do enjoy it. I think it's a fine magazine.
That A4 size is just so satisfying, isn't it? And I mean, it's beautiful. And, I read the Rialto immediately after sitting down with PNR for a few hours, and then started reading the Rialto, and I just couldn't stop. There was one great poem after another, or at the very least, a really interesting poem. I read it almost, the whole magazine almost in one sitting.
Well, that's a great endorsement, isn't it? Really. It's what more could an editor want?
To almost pick a poem at random, there was one that just kind of struck me as being really odd. And I've got a thing, I think I've mentioned it on the podcast about fish. And there's a poem called Flounder by Tim Craven, who's not a poet I know. But maybe I should just read this poem. Flounder. One way I used to meet the rent was to scoop flounder out of a great fiberglass tank. Flat beasts without the tasteful symmetry of the dorso-ventrally pancaked stingray. The flounder were caught sideways in the machinery of evolution, one eye creeping awfully around the corner of its face. I gripped the fanned quarter moon of its tail and, with the action of a backhand smash, struck its head across the workbench so its body spasmed into the curl of the letter C, as though trying to form a final word. The calmest part, the scalpel, its medical-grade sharpness running down the length of the back, and watching the watery meat separate under its own tension as the smell of the wild cold poured out from the wound. I snipped each translucent vertebra, bent them back, and unpicked the connective tissue with tweezers. The adaptive capacity to survive in fresh water or ocean, I was told, held the key to human life. But I was just there for the pension and the free coffee, harvesting data from glass electrodes, their points so sharp they slipped invisibly into spines, with alpha waves lapping green over the oscilloscope. In order not to sacrifice everything, I took the fillets off the bone, thinking of batter, of fragrant steam. That's really puzzled me, that poem, because at first it was like someone, cutting up a flounder to be eaten, and then, you get to the oscilloscopes and
yes.
all this stuff, and then you reread it and you think, scooping them out of a fiberglass tank, and the way it's kind of scientifically described, and then using a scalpel to cut it up, and then this thing of harvesting data, from this flounder.
Yes.
I'm not sure what was being done there, but it's that kind of weird relationship between nature and humanity. But it's just such an odd poem, but it just completely arrested me. I really liked it. Reading poetry magazines is big and clever, and I think, P&R is an education in itself and locates poetry in a wider canvas of literature, I think. But Rialto is just a collection of new poetry which just kind of really grabs you and drags you through. It's so well edited. I mean, both of them are brilliantly edited, but two magazines I'd continue to subscribe to for the foreseeable future.
So I've been going back to a poet who I admire a great deal, Ian Duig.
Mm-hmm.
The poem is The Lammas Hireling, which is also the title poem of his collection of 2003. And in fact, this poem, The Lammas Hireling, won the National Poetry Competition in 2001. Yeah, so much I like about Ian Duig. He's down to earth, he's very much grounded, but he's also very well read, and he's able to reference popular culture, the classics, folklore, old traditions. He's also political. I think he tackles issues that he feels strongly about, but it's never in a sort of didactic way. Expect the unexpected, I think, with him. He specialises in these kinds of poems that are almost wake-up calls. But I thought I might just read The Lammas Hireling, because that's the one I tend to go back to. Shall I do that?
Please do, yeah.
The Lammas Hireling, for Robert Walters. After the fair, I'd still a light heart and a heavy purse. He struck so cheap. And cattle doted on him. In his time, mine only dropped heifers, fat as cream. Yields doubled. I grew fond of company that knew when to shut up. Then one night, disturbed from dreams of my dear late wife, I hunted down her torn voice to his pale form. Stock still in the light from the dark lantern, stark naked but for the fox trap biting his ankle. I knew him a warlock, a cow with leather horns. To go into the hair gets you muckle sorrow, the wisdom runs, muckle care. I levelled and blew the small hour through his heart. The moon came out. By its yellow witness I saw him fur over like a stone mossing. His lovely head thinned, his top lip gathered. His eyes rose like bread. I carried him in a sack that grew lighter at every step and dropped him from a bridge. There was no splash. Now my herd is elf-shot. I don't dream, but spend my nights casting ball from half-crowns, and my days here. Bless me, Father, I have sinned. It has been an hour since my last confession.
Wow.
It's
God, that's great. I just really want to keep rereading that. Actually, yeah.
I know it's such a puzzling, sort of devastating but puzzling poem.
Just at the end, it's been an hour since my last confession.
Oh, yes,
that sense of this thing just being continuous torment, all these memories
over and over. Yeah. Brilliant stuff. So, Mr. Ian Dewig. So that collection is called The Lammas Tiling, and it's from Picador.
Where I came from, Robin, in Guernsey, the whole business of collaborating had a bit of a nasty undercurrent to it.
Yes.
But what do you think of when you think of collaboration, though? Something more positive?
I'm not a natural collaborator, I have to admit. I think there's a difference in schooling. I think these days, kids in school, they do a lot of group work, and I think it's a natural thing. My generation, certainly the school I went to, it was everyone for themselves. A little bit isolationist, I suppose. And I'm not saying that was good. I feel that's left me with the inability to readily collaborate. And yet I see such amazing collaborations going on around me. And I do. Obviously, we're collaborating now, and it's been teaching me to...
By stealth, yeah. Stealthy collaboration.
And do you think also it's to do with trust, isn't it? You have to trust the people that you're working with. And I feel like I've had my fingers burnt a couple of times, and it does shake you, I think.
I think because of the way my job, I've worked as a copywriter in advertising agencies a lot over the years. And normally you work with an art director, so you're forced to collaborate with another person, every day pretty much. So, I think that really helped me in my kind of openness to collaborate with other people. I've enjoyed working with musicians, for example, because I think you just need really clearly defined roles when you're collaborating with somebody.
On the podcast, we've spoken to people, haven't we, who've done collaborative work. Katrina Porteous, I remember when she came on, and she had worked with musicians on a regular basis. Claire Best is someone who we know, who fine poet. She loves collaborating. She's done a very interesting work with artists like Michaela Ridgway, and she's also more recently got into writing libretti for opera, so she's definitely in that zone. And Tammy Yoseloff,
she's very much into visual art, isn't she, Tammy? And
another one I'd like to mention actually is Maggie Sawkins, her Zones of Avoidance, which was an excellent book from Cinnamon, 2015. And it actually came out of a live literature production with Mark Hewitt. And it won
Is Mark Hewitt a poet as well?
He's a poet as well, but he's very much involved in putting on dramatisations and events, live events. Mm-hmm. And Zones of Avoidance won the 2013 Ted Hughes Award for New Work in Poetry. So that was and I saw a performance of it. It was amazingly moving.
In terms of collaboration, I think of classical examples like Wordsworth and, the lyrical ballads, him and Coleridge working together, or kind of working together.
Yes.
But I think of like The Wasteland, I remember being at university and having to look at the annotations that Ezra Pound made and, all his crossings out of, and that thing about Emilio Fabro, T.S. Eliot saying that, Ezra Pound was the better craftsman and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that shows a really kind of trusting relationship, that you give this amazing kind of absolutely groundbreaking poem to somebody else who just cuts loads of lines out of it, you know.
It really does, doesn't it? And it's interesting that, because we touched on that at school, but the Ezra Pound connection was never referred to. It's almost as if Pound did go into the wilderness for quite a long time, and it's only recently that I understood what a huge role he played in the wasteland. So
we've talked a lot about poetry and translation on this podcast as well, and there's that, you know, the collaboration of poets with their translators.
Yes, you know, indeed.
Like Brian Holton and Yang Lian, you know, that they have a very close, if sparring, relationship with one another.
Yes, that was amazing, wasn't it? That sounded like a really interesting, a long-standing friendship and artistic collaboration. Yes, really creatively interesting.
What's the worst collaboration you've ever had?
Well, I can't answer that. I'd rather not think about it. Too traumatic. I'd rather think about all the lovely stuff like Telltale Press and Planet Poetry. Hurrah for the happy...
The good parts of collaboration, yeah, and not its dark underbelly.
I think it can slip over into not collaboration, but more like a competition or even exploitation. But none of that happens here.
No. I wouldn't be able to... Yeah. The idea of like forcing my will on other people sounds too exhausting for me.